Second. Hey everybody, it's Mick here from Climate Salad. We love sharing incredible stories of people doing great work in this space. And someone I've known for a long time, not in climate tech, who has also dived deeply into this space, is Mike Casey. And he's going to share a bit about electrifying the ag world. Mike, how you going?
I'm doing really well, Thanks, Mick. It's been a little while since the days we were working together in the Sydney tech startup scene, but we're funny how we ended up largely in the same space.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good evolution, right? And it is exciting to see. So I know you've got some content to share. Why don't you share that, and then we can have a chat about it. We'll get a few people to drop in and maybe ask Q&A, but take us through the content.
Sure thing. Well, Mick's invited me today to talk about the electrification of agriculture and how I think farmers are going to play a massive role in lowering the emissions of both New Zealand, where I now live and where I'm originally from, and also Australia. So, very, very quickly, my name is Mike Casey, and I am known as the electric cherry orchardist from Central Otago here in New Zealand. Very well known now in New Zealand for basically jumping up and down constantly about the need to electrify everything here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, but also now I have been invited over to Australia a number of times to present on my journey over the last 5 years. Very, very quickly, I spent 12 years in Sydney building technology startups. One of those startups was reasonably successful. We got acquired by Seek in 2019, and that gave my wife Rebecca and I an opportunity to move back to New Zealand. We moved to this region, Central Otago, which is about an hour's out of Queenstown, about half an hour south of Wanaka, if you guys know where that is. And what we ended up doing with all this hard-earned up startup capital that we ended up having when we got acquired was to found an orchard. And the reason that we founded an orchard was quite simply we were looking for homes in Queenstown and Wanaka and found a farm that was about half an hour south of Wanaka for the same price as a four-bedroom home in Wanaka. And so very, very quickly decided that we wanted to move into this house that had 9 hectares of spare land. I'm an entrepreneur who was looking for a way to reinvent himself after selling his business. My wife is a very senior accountant who simply loves a bargain. And very, very quickly, we realized that we were going to be moving and becoming the newest entrants in New Zealand's primary sector. So Forest Lodge Orchard, we ended up using that spare land, that 9 hectares, and planting 9,300 cherry trees, which is the equivalent of 25 kilometers worth of cherry trees. And at full production, which we hit for the first time this year after 5 years of growing our trees, is about 80 tons worth of cherries coming out of our gates every season, which is probably the equivalent of 6, 7, 8 million cherries. So a really large commercial operation, which has been quite cool. And while we do grow the best cherries in the world, I can put my hand on my heart and tell you that after sampling thousands upon thousands of them, the one thing that we've become really known for is that we run our whole entire operation without using a single drop of diesel or a single ounce of gas. Absolutely everything on our farm, the 21 machines that we use to run our farm, are electric. And to take you through a couple of those machines, this is everything from your standard orchard tools through to your vehicles that you'll find quite regularly on a farm, through to even our road vehicles. This is our frost fighting fans. So one of our biggest risks to our orchard is frost, and these fans work by pulling warm air down from above, mixing it around the orchard, and bringing the average temperature of the orchard up. These fans save about 40 liters of diesel an hour, so a really significant, cost not only cost reduction but an emissions reduction as well. We also imported what we think is the first ever electric tractor to be exported out of the US or even exported out of California. This was the 66th ever tractor made in California and came all the way over to Central Otago because I managed to convince the board of a $1 billion tech startup that we were the ideal customer, maybe just in the complete wrong location. And on the back of that is what we believe is the world's first fully electric foliage sprayer. So instead of running off the drive shaft or the PTO at the back of the tractor, we instead run off a 32 amp caravan plug powered by the tractor, which uses about 20% the electricity that we would otherwise be using, which means that we can have this tractor go the distance and can, spray our entire orchard when we need to on a single charge. We also get lent every year an electric truck to take all our cherries down to the pack house where they are packed. And so fossil fuels only gets involved in the first time in this process when it's ready to distribute our cherries out to market. So from basically from the moment the buds on the trees start swelling right up into the point where the cherries are put into the boxes is completely without any form of fossil fuel, which is something I've been quite proud of. So it's been a very, very interesting time because what I have started to learn very, very quickly is that electric technology is very, very cheap, but it's even cheaper when you are able to generate and supply that electricity yourself. And this is something that I've been speaking a lot about with farmers. So, but first, before I go into that, like the first thing I would like, what I'm very, very keen on always doing is sharing the exact numbers on exactly how much I spent on my electric farm compared to how much I would have spent on a fossil fuel farm. So this is essentially buying 21 fossil fuel machines versus buying 21 electric machines. And I'm a big proponent that transparency breeds trust. And so what I've done is basically put all my numbers out into something that's publicly consumable by farmers so they can start to see what is going on. And the number one thing at the moment is, with a couple of grants that we have got, we have a market payback of about 13 years or a complete payback with grants of around about 8 years on machines that we're now expecting to last somewhere between 15 and 20 years. So it gives you an idea if you're buying a new machine in New Zealand, it's pretty much always the case now where the electric option is the best option if you intend to run that machine from the moment that it's alive until obviously it needs to be replaced. So solar and batteries now play a major role in this. To give you an example, an orchard my size, and this is in New Zealand pesos, not Australian dollars, so just be aware of that. It will be cheaper for you guys at face value at least. But we avoided about $53,000 worth of diesel use per year by going fully electric on our farm. Running 21 electric machines on New Zealand's national grid meant that we could more than halve our energy costs. So farm input costs are a massive issue for farmers in both Australia and New Zealand, and we've worked out that actually, we can save a significant amount of money by simply swapping out the fuels and running off New Zealand's national grid. I then built my first solar and battery system to power these machines because one of the most amazing things about running a fully electric farm is that the payback or the return on investment of solar and batteries gets much, much better. And I can go into that in more detail in a moment. But we nearly halved our energy bills again. And that allowed me to convince my wife, the financial controller, that actually we wanted to go the next level and look at expanding our solar and battery array out. So for those of you that understand the metrics of solar and batteries, we currently now run 160 kilowatts worth of solar and 300 kilowatt hours worth of batteries. I'm constantly exporting power back out into the grid, and I'm also arbitraging the wholesale market in New Zealand with my batteries, and I'm expecting this year to make about a $40,000 revenue stream or $40,000 worth of profit on that solar system as well. So basically almost turning a $50,000 bill into a $40,000 revenue stream on a farm that would expect in a good year to make 250,000 of EBIT gives you a pretty good understanding of just how significant an opportunity this is for farmers. And while I built a cherry orchard, one of the big things that ended up happening was essentially we ended up with so many people coming to visit our farm. We created kind of this electrification tourism opportunity, which is mainly people from the primary sector being very, very interested in how they can reduce farm input costs. So not only did we end up, essentially saving a whole bunch of emissions, I think in total we ended up with about 40 tons of emissions were saved by not burning that diesel necessarily. But we also created this really interesting dynamic where people from all different walks of life, didn't matter what their thoughts were on climate, didn't matter what their political views were or anything like that. They were coming because of the farm input cost reductions that we were able to achieve. So I started to work on this a bit more. I founded a charity organization called Rewiring Aotearoa, which is a sister organization of Rewiring Australia and Rewiring America. Many of you would have probably heard of Rewiring Australia before. To focus on how it is that farmers can play a massive role in emissions reductions, rapid emissions reductions this decade. This is a Sankey diagram, which is the way that we traditionally in both countries, categorize our emissions. And you can sort of see how massively different Australia's emissions look to New Zealand's emissions. What we have in New Zealand is this very interesting dynamic that, unlike you guys, that you're able to dig stuff up out of the ground and sell that overseas. We make the majority of our money in New Zealand through agriculture, and of course, agriculture has agricultural emissions. And this is a real problem for New Zealand's narrative because when we bring in a narrative from overseas, this just makes our farmers look like climate criminals and has really gone a long way of dividing our society in New Zealand, where everybody looks and goes, well, farmers are responsible for over half of our emissions, so we need to look at, figuring out ways of reducing their emissions. When at the same time, we still need to go through an energy transition like everybody else. And so what I wanted to do is create something a little bit different. And so the team at Rewiring Aotearoa, we haven't added to New Zealand's emissions, we haven't subtracted from them, but we've changed the narrative to not talk about what the emissions actually are, but the reasons that we create those emissions. And so if we take that and we do this expansion, New Zealand's emissions can be divided into two key categories: our domestic emissions and our export emissions. Now, our export emissions are the ones that are very hard for us to talk about because they're how we make all our money. They are emissions that are created in New Zealand ultimately for products that are consumed by people overseas. Our domestic emissions, on the other hand, are emissions that underpin the average lifestyles of New Zealanders. And if we take those emissions and expand on those emissions, well, this is really interesting because 25% of New Zealand's gross emissions come from small fossil fuel machines where the technology exists to replace them today. And so that's what I have decided that I am going to be doing, is figuring out how it is that we can build out a renewable electricity system in this country to massively accelerate the electrification of these fossil fuel machines, and also letting everybody know in New Zealand that actually we're at a point where you're never better off buying a small fossil fuel machine again. So I'll go into that in a bit more detail. But New Zealand's energy system is really interesting. So we pat ourselves on the back and tell everyone about how we're way better than Australia because our electricity system is largely renewable. But the issue is when you look at energy as a whole in New Zealand, 75% of the energy that we use still comes from fossil fuels, right? And those fossil fuels are largely sourced from overseas. It works out to be about 3.1 million tons of refined fuels shipped from the other side of the world on 68 ships and rolled out on 300,000 independent truck journeys every year to power the 4.3 million cars in New Zealand. And when you add the cars together with all the other machines, New Zealanders are spending collectively about $40 million a day on foreign sourced energy. So one of the big things that I've been arguing for a long time in New Zealand is starting to have a lot of traction, especially with, say, some of the more economic conservative types, is that actually it makes no sense that we're spending all this money and having this money go overseas on foreign source molecules when we could instead be, using this energy that we create ourselves in this country. So essentially, New Zealand made electrons. And the figures are quite astounding. If you just look at the households of New Zealand, if you were to electrify all the machines, which includes the car, but also the way that we heat our water, the way that we heat our homes, the way that we cook our food, and did that across all the homes in New Zealand, we would save about $10.7 billion a year by 2040, or nearly $100 billion cumulatively by 2040, which is such a staggering amount of money for typical New Zealanders to save. No one can conceptualize how much that is. So I've made it easy for New Zealanders and basically said to them that we could not build rugby stadiums fast enough to keep up with the savings that New Zealanders could potentially make from electrification. Now, one of the interesting things is this is, of course, not crown. This is not money that the Crown saves, right? This is money that is actually saved. It's kept in the wallets of New Zealanders, in our communities, on our farms, in our small businesses, and actually just makes us more prosperous as a whole. So it's a big part, but I think farmers are actually a key unlock for this. If we look at what my goal is now is essentially how do I reduce 25% of New Zealand's emissions this decade or close to this decade and save New Zealand $10 billion. And so the problem with New Zealand, though, is that our electricity system has lost its social license because we've had too many private companies for too long looking at ways of maximizing profits. And as a result, our price of electricity is really expensive. I still don't think it's quite as expensive as what it is in Australia, but it is much higher than what I believe it should be. And in order to electrify these machines, we are going to, these 10 million machines, we're going to need at least twice the amount of electricity that we've currently got. That is a massive issue because that requires a lot of infrastructure build out that is going to be taking a lot longer than the next 5 years that we have this decade to really make an impact on climate. And so what I've been arguing with New Zealand and with New Zealand's government is actually farmers and households are going to play a pivotal role in supplying more energy back into New Zealand's energy system. So when you look at a typical power bill in New Zealand, about half of it is the cost of generation at our large power plants, and the other half of it is all the other stuff that essentially connects our homes or our farms to our dams. And it's getting expensive and getting more expensive. We're at about 35 cents a kilowatt hour. I think you guys are about 42 cents a kilowatt hour. It's largely the same makeup of costs, roughly. But the interesting thing here in New Zealand is that when you finance rooftop solar on your mortgage at 5.5%, it works out to be 12.7 cents a kilowatt hour, a fraction of the price of the grid. Now, you guys are in an even better position because you've got higher grid prices, but far lower solar prices. You have the best rollout of solar and the best solar industry in the world. And I think you're scraping at around about 4 or 5 cents a kilowatt hour when you finance on your mortgage in Australia. So you can see that there's a massive opportunity here because farmers and households, we pay retail for power, not the wholesale rate of electricity for power. And so we're always looking at being incentivized as customers to install more solar systems. The interesting thing where you guys are probably at now and where we're not too far away from here in New Zealand is that the price to generate a kilowatt hour of energy on your rooftop and store it in a battery is now the same price as what you're going to get if you buy it from the grid when you finance it in your mortgage at 5.5%. So that is a pretty remarkable sort of inflection point in New Zealand's electricity system now where it is becoming cheaper to look for other options. Now, a little bit about New Zealand's electricity system, which is super interesting, is we have a great advantage that you guys don't have in Australia, which is we have hydro storage facilities, and there's three major lakes in New Zealand: Pukaki, Tekapo, and Taupo, which are roughly when they're full. If it doesn't rain, we have about 6 to 8 weeks of storage. So those are our giant batteries. But the problem is when we start to run out of water, which is what's happening right now in New Zealand because it hasn't rained in a long time. We've had El Nino, we've had a drought, is that we start retrospectively firming our hydro with coal, i.e., putting coal into the network in order to hold on to that water for longer. This is a massive issue because it means our emissions on our highly renewable grid spike quite massively. And what my argument for now is, well, actually, if we do a mass rollout of solar in New Zealand, can we preemptively firm our water or our hydro assets by basically not needing to consume as much of it during the day? So I did the numbers on this, and yes, 80% of homes with a 9 kilowatt system will generate about 40% more electricity for our electricity system. But the bigger thing is it will buy us another 29 days worth of water storage in a dry year, which is significant. It's an extra month of storage, or almost, you could argue somewhere between adding 50 to 100% more water storage to our dams, which is quite remarkable. But I think the real superpower here is actually our farmers. If 25,000 farmers did what I did, which is not an excessive amount of solar, it's 120 kilowatts or something of solar, we would generate about 30% more renewable electricity for New Zealand's electricity system. And we would end up with an extra 15 days of water storage just from the farmers alone. And so this is one thing that I've been very big on is talking to farmers about the actual role they have in electrifying New Zealand's economy. We're not small scale, we're not large scale. We actually are this perfect point in the middle where we are mid-scale solutions. And right now, it's something that is very interesting, unlike what's happening in Australia, is that the price on the wholesale market for electricity right at this point of time is probably 40, 45 cents a kilowatt hour. Whereas, of course, during the day for you guys, it plummets to zero. So there is a massive opportunity at the moment. And this won't be around forever, but right now there is a massive opportunity for very quick return on investment for farmers installing solar at scale and going on the wholesale and basically trading on the wholesale market. And so that's a big thing about what I'm doing. So I'll probably finish up there, and I hope you join me essentially, is that while Australia and New Zealand farmers have slightly different problems, our issues are largely the same, right? It's largely
Yeah.
farm input costs and how do we lower them? And I think we're going to lower that by not only allowing them to electrify everything, but allowing them to help our economies electrify as well. So that's it from me.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that, mate. That's really, really good. And it's great to see that sort of depth. I think obviously Saul Griffith and the team have done that a little bit in Australia. I think building on Rick's question about the availability of the equipment, you're obviously a really early adopter, and you convinced that $1 billion company to give you that equipment. I've got no doubt that by 2035 that you'll be well past all of that, got those goals, and it'll be We look back on 2025 and we won't recognize it, but the journey to get there, like how you're getting people visiting the farm, what's their response, what's the industry response, and how if they go, yes, I get it, let's do it. How quickly can they actually go and adopt this stuff? Is it actually readily available yet?
Yeah, so what I'm finding with farmers, the big thing has been the ability to generate electricity is a concept that probably isn't as foreign to Australian farmers as it is to New Zealand farmers. We've been really behind Australia on our solar adoption for reasons that I can only suggest it's due to private company lobbying, saying that solar doesn't have a strong role to play in New Zealand, where it takes a cherry farmer to prove that situation wrong. But in many, many cases, like I'm not asking farmers to necessarily electrify everything immediately overnight.
Mm.
Really,
Yep.
what we need to be doing is making sure that when the next machine breaks, they're investigating whether there is an electric option available and using that option. Tractors are
Yep.
the high hanging cherries, solar
Yep.
panels on the barn are the low hanging cherries, and eventually we will get there. But no, like I probably made the mistake early on of trying to tell people they can go fully electric, while also understanding how difficult it is. In
Yeah.
actual fact, it's like this is a journey. We start somewhere and we go from there. But the big thing about generating your own electricity is there's a massive amount of cognitive dissonance that exists with diesel machines if you're not able to use the energy you can create yourself. So that's basically where I go with farmers now is generate and
Yeah.
store first, run your irrigation, and then maybe after that we'll start looking at electric machines.
Yeah, I think it's a critical tipping point that we've got to, and probably what's happening in the US forces this a bit faster. Like, instead of saying, please do this because it's slightly better for the environment, even though it's more expensive, yeah, I think it's got to be there's got to be other benefits. So energy security, food security, and I totally agree with you. I think agriculture is so important because it's the intersection of growing things and nature and food and such an energy use as well. Like it is one of the key areas, and we can change the way we do it. But it really is that journey and. Yeah, I think it's working out what their big starting points are. Like, okay, I remember saying out publicly, I think everyone there's going to be reverse range anxiety in 10 years' time when people, you can't fill up your petrol car. People are like, oh, farmers will never do that. You're like, well, farmers should be highly motivated to actually have EVs because you can generate your own energy instead of driving 100 kilometers to fill your tank up. So
And
it is a
we also just by driving a lot more Ks, there is so much more. So one of the big things with rural New Zealand has been sort of advising them on actually, if anyone's to get electric vehicles, it should be them because, the typical New Zealander drives 11,000 Ks a year. I drive nearly 40,000 Ks a year because I live 15K out of town. I have to drop my kids at school twice a day.
yeah.
So that is a really significant amount of savings by going electric. The one way that I sort of compare it at the moment is it probably costs you about $2.60, $2.70 a liter for petrol.
Yeah.
The solar equivalent is 30 cents a liter. And
Yeah.
it's just numbers like that and communicating those that are ultimately what's winning people over. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think as well, it's one of those gradually then suddenly things, right? Which is it's like, oh, I'm just used to this so much, and it seems really normal, and it seems like that other thing is a bit harder. And it's like I get that you're talking about the big price differential, but the behavior change is almost the behavior change means the economic value has got to be really significant. But it also, like, you're the very, very early adopter, and then three or four people also do it, and then it starts tipping over and becomes normalized. And I think
Correct.
that's like I think it's a combination of actually economic value and normalizing it. And how are you seeing that? Is that starting to happen now that after? I mean, you've been doing this for a while. Is it starting to get
It's
easier?
really, I'm really enthused by just how fast this stuff is starting to happen now in agriculture.
Mm.
Um, I think the number one reason is, and so, Rick, your question is one I can go into and when answering this question as well, has been the work that we've been doing to make sure that farmers can feed back and add value back into the grid. We are a long way from it being a fair system in New Zealand, but I think we're closer to it being a fair system than we are in Australia. And I think that's something that ultimately, if we can galvanize farmers around how unfair the system is at the moment for electricity. And I don't know enough about the different lines companies or DNSPs in Australia, but when I was over there presenting, people, farmers were saying we get paid nothing on export, or
Mm.
we're not allowed to export. And the answer is the pricing signals should always be there so that when power is valuable to the network, the pricing signals suggest that they push it back. Now, that might not be like at the moment in New Zealand with the way our electricity system is set up. Um, Middle of the day is 45 cents a kilowatt hour, which is a remarkable return on investment for a solar system, which probably cost me on farm at my scale about 7 cents a kilowatt hour to generate,
Yeah,
right? But that, my whole goal is to have exactly what happened in Australia, where the price of power plummets to zero in the middle of the day because there's plenty of power going around.
yeah,
But that means this power is going to be incredibly valuable at other times when it's not sunny, and that's where batteries potentially play a strong role. The thing about farmers is they're often in the areas that are the most expensive to get power to. They're next to the town that
mm,
is on a single line that has to be maintained, and this ability for farmers to do a lot of this regional, generation, I think is pretty exciting. And I think I don't know enough about the nuclear debate that's going on in Australia, but I'll, hands down say I think it's a really dumb idea. I just don't see how you can socialize the costs of a nuclear setup across 24, 26 million people, however many people you've got now. It just doesn't make sense to me.
mm,
But galvanizing the farmers around actually them being the ones that can achieve a lot of these outcomes is really cool. And I think one of the things at the moment is, we get a lot of farmers in Australia that are very anti-transmission lines. And I can tell you straight away that they're anti-transmission lines because those transmission lines are a symbol of an energy system that doesn't allow them to participate.
yeah,
So if you change allowing them to participate, then all of a sudden those transmission lines become a symbol of revenue and it
yeah,
gets a lot easier. So I think that's a clear problem. Something that I've been sort of talking to Rewiring Australia, but also want to share with you guys is actually, yeah, how do you go in and fight for farmers? Because every solar panel that gets installed isn't really necessarily doing a lot for the electricity system, but it will help to decarbonize the car fleet. It will help to decarbonize because you're going to need so much more electricity. And
yeah,
so batteries will play a strong role in helping supply that load when it's needed. And as long as the tariffs are set up correctly, you'll
yeah.
see some pretty good responses coming from that. So I think that nuclear idea in Australia is rather backward, and it's not thinking about the future opportunity, which is to have the customer solve a lot of problems on the energy system. Yeah.
Well, if you want to have a industry which sells energy to people, then it does make a lot of sense. Because that's the world you're describing is there's not a centralized company that sells power, and I think there are fundamental economic things that the government doesn't quite get, like the
Yeah.
fuel excise in Australia is a big one. They're like, we just don't understand how our economics and finances work under an EV world. As I think it's hard. It's just a lot of change, and it's also some things haven't fully changed yet. So they're seeing the start of it. And I think the same thing around the grid. Yeah, everyone's just government and industry are used to this big grid. They produce a lot of energy, they shove it down, and it's going to be different again in 10 years' time. But changing it, it's like any massive systemic change. It is actually clunky to begin with because you can't get there in one big step. And there are things which actually do change materially when if half of everyone's using solar and half of everyone's still using the main grid like the normal way, that you've got two half inefficient systems.
Well, I
So
think I think like you be proud of the solar installation industry now in Australia. It is world leading. You have a problem where you've got to figure out how to replace coal on the network. New
yeah,
Zealand has the other problem. We don't have a lot of coal. We just use coal stupidly when we start running out of water. But we are so far behind. And every time I'm talking to a politician in New Zealand right now, it's we just need to copy Australia. Don't
mm,
reinvent the wheel. Just do exactly what Australia's done. And so
yeah,
that's you're going a long way to helping New Zealand in that regard with optimizing an electricity system. There's just a lot of regulations that have to be changed, Rick.
yeah,
And my
yeah.
goal at the moment is, maybe it's going to take a cherry farmer to help make that happen finally.
I think as well, like all the big trends are absolutely going this direction, and I think the nuclear debate will be a moot point because the drop in price of batteries coming out of China, it's like it's beating Moore's law and Wright's law or like massively. I think if you have Australia just announced a possible $3,000 subsidy for home batteries. I think that's going to be like with the cost coming down, the value going up, and the subsidies going up. I think in 3 years' time, it'd be I think we'll be in a totally different situation. And then if we can get vehicle to grid sorted, again, it's going to be messy. It's not going to be a single step. But I think, real kudos to you in terms of taking the bold approach because I don't think it's just being bold. You've got to actually be economic about it, and you've got to be able to communicate, and you've got to have patience with people to go through this change. You can't get frustrated when someone's like, "Oh yeah, but I love my you." Like it's okay for everyone to be going through a journey. Um,
Electrify everything you don't love, Mick. That's the number one way to get boy racers and farmers on board is just to tell them that if they truly love it, then it's an irrational emotion, and therefore we're not going to try and talk about economics. And
agree.
this is one of the things I think that the climate movement has made a massive mistake on globally is guilting people on everything that they enjoy. It's
Yeah.
like, mate, if you really love your car or you love your tractor more than you love your wife, then that is okay. Hold
Sure.
on to that. Let's just get a hot water heat pump in on the house. That's the way that we do this.
I agree. We're going to get there. It's going to be step by step, bite by bite, but absolutely making progress. And I'm keen to get over there, mate, and try some of those cherries. They sound pretty good. So
Gotta make
I'm
sure you
assuming
come in January then. Yeah,
in January
that,
that's
that-
the good time.
they're only around
Okay,
for 6 weeks of the year and then they're
do some
gone.
pick,
So it's
do
rather
some
boring at
picking.
this time. You were always welcome, my friend.
All good, Mike. Thank you so much for sharing. Really appreciate it. Thanks for your good work. Keen to share this story out, and thanks everyone for dropping by.
Talk to you soon.